little bit of background that happened before this chapter, because we're looking at conquest and covenant tonight. There was a lot of conquest going on. These are the people of Israel that come into the land, across the Jordan. We've done all that, followed all that. They've come in, they've kept the rite of circumcision, they've kept the remembrance of the Passover, and they're going to go and take Jericho. Now, chapter 6 in Joshua, 2 before the one we're about to read, says how they took it. And we started to read this morning of how the Lord instructed Joshua how it was to be taken. And it was extraordinary. I'll just tell you very quickly. He said, you tell the priest to blow on ram's horns. And then there's the Ark of the Covenant. This is to be a sort of march around the city of Jericho. There's the priests blowing on ram's horns, the ark being carried on the shoulders of the priest. We talked about that last night. And then the people will follow, and the people are to be silent. And you'll go all the way around the city. And the next day you'll come out of your camp, and you'll go all around the city. And the third day, you'll do the same thing. And the fourth day, and the fifth day, and the sixth day, you'll go 6 days in the week. They would go all around the city, with the priests blowing on the horns, the ark being carried, and the people just going along silent. Just imagine that you lived in the city of Jericho, and you're peeping over the wall, and you're thinking, what on earth? What are they doing? Never seen anything like this before. On the seventh day, the Lord told Joshua to tell the people, and he told the people, you'll go around it 7 times. You'll keep going and going and going. 7 times you'll go around the city. And on the 7th time, he said, when I give the signal, you'll shout. And all the people were to shout. And at that point, you know this story. We sang about it. Thank you, David. The walls came tumbling down. And that's how the city of Jericho was conquered, which is sort of word that belongs to conquest. That's how it began. And God gave them an instruction, again through Joshua. He said, when you take the city of Jericho, you're not to take anything out of it. So don't pick up the gold, don't pick up the clothes, don't pick up the whatever, furniture, kitchen stuff. You just leave everything there. It belongs to the Lord. Leave everything in Jericho. Do not pilfer. Do not take any booty. Do not take anything from the spoils of war. You just move away out of the conquered city. One man called Achan, it was as if he couldn't help himself. I guess he was just coming through the rubble of the walls, and he looked and he saw something really, really attractive. And he went to pick that up, and he probably saw something else. He took this beautiful garment and some gold, and he somehow got that out of there. And I want to say to you, I'm pretty sure he had help in it, because there's no way he could have done it just like that on his own. And when he got it back to his tent in the camp, because they still had tents at this stage, he hid it in his tent, and he must have had help to do that as well. So his family were all involved in it. And Achan did that, and it was a secret thing, but it was a dreadful sin. He was blatantly disobedient to what God had told him. First part of the story. Second part is, the next day, they went up to go to another city, the city of Ai, which wasn't very far away. Jericho was big, Ai was small. And they went up to fight against Ai, and the men of Ai came out and chased them off. Big shock. How did this happen? Why did it happen? Joshua was dismayed, and he asked the Lord, he said, why, it's a good question. Why did this happen? And the Lord revealed to him that this sin had taken place. Didn't tell him who or where or what, but he said, this has happened. Somebody's taken something of the consecrated things. So Joshua called all the people together, and cut a long story short, this is chapter 7 now, it all came down to Achan, and Achan had to confess. He said, I did it. I saw, I wanted, and I took. Achan and his family lost their lives that day. It's God's judgment on them. Might seem a bit harsh, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but they lost their lives. So they dealt with the sin, they dealt with the judgment of the sin, the thing was finished. And the men went back up to Ai. The Lord said, you go and take Ai. And this time, well, let's read about it. Chapter 8. That's the background to chapter 8, right? This is where we are. The Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You shall go to Ai, you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city. So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 men of his best fighting men and sent them out at night with these orders. Listen carefully. You are to set an ambush behind the city. Don't go very far from it. All of you be on the alert. I and all those with me will advance on the city. And when the men come out against us, as they did before, we will flee from them, and they will pursue us until we have lured them away from the city. For they will say, they're turning away from us, as they did before. So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from the ambush and take the city. The Lord your God will give it into your hand. And when you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do what the Lord has commanded. See to it, you have my orders. Then Joshua sent them off, and they went to the place of ambush and lay in wait between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. But Joshua spent that night with the people. Early the next morning, Joshua mustered his army. He and the leaders of Israel marched before them to Ai. The entire force that was with him marched up and approached the city and arrived in front of it. They set up camp north of Ai, with the valley between them and the city. Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. So the soldiers took up their positions with the main camp to the north of the city and the ambush to the west of it. And that night Joshua went into the valley. When the king of Ai saw this, he and all the men of the city hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in battle at a certain place overlooking the Arabah. But he did not know that an ambush had been set against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel let themselves be driven back before them, and they fled towards the wilderness, and all the men of Ai were called to pursue them. And they pursued Joshua, lured away from the city. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. They left the city open and went in pursuit of Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, hold out towards Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city. So Joshua held out towards the city the javelin that was in his hand, and as soon as he did this, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. And the men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising up into the sky, but they had no chance to escape in any direction. The Israelites who had been fleeing towards the wilderness had turned back against their pursuers. But when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and the smoke was going up from the city, they turned round and attacked the men of Ai. Those in the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle, with Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. And when Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai, for Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. But Israel did carry off for themselves the livestock and plunder of this city, as the Lord had instructed Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruin, a desolate place to this day. He impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole and left it there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take the body from the pole and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate, and they raised a large pile of rocks over it, which remains to this day. And the rest of the chapter deals with another bit that's up here, which is covenant, but we're going to leave that for tonight. I'll explain that in a minute. We can pick it up on Friday. I want to begin by saying something to you about a problem that arises in the minds of many people when they read passages like this in the Bible, and it becomes an issue. And I think I want to say to you also that if it's not a problem with you as you read it, there's something wrong with us. It ought to be a problem. Thousands of people lost their lives. That always ought to affect us. But this is where the problem leads to very often. We talk about barbarous activities by the Israelites. We talk about gruesome genocide, not we, but some people do. You may talk about ethnic cleansing. Is that what happened? We need to face that because it's a real problem for people as they read, particularly the Old Testament. Let me tell you something we touched on in our group this morning. In Genesis chapter, well, we didn't intend to, I don't know how we got on to that, but Genesis 15 is the record of God making a covenant with Abraham. And in it, he's explaining to Abraham this is the land that I'm giving you. That's part of my covenant promise to you. And let me tell you, Abraham, you're going to go out of, you and your family are going to go from this land. And you won't be back for some time. And he explains why they won't be back for some time. He said, because the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. Sounds a bit unusual. Let me explain that to you. God was saying to him, the people that live in the land of Canaan, Amorites amongst them, were so wicked, so deeply sinful, and it was so offensive to God that they'd polluted the land that they lived in. And God foresaw that that was going to get worse and worse and worse until he could do nothing more but come in judgment and take them out of the land. He said that's not going to happen for some time to come. And he said that to Abraham back in Genesis 15. So when we come to Joshua chapter 5, as we did this morning in our studies, and see a warrior standing with a sword in his hand, and Lily pointed that out for us in our group this morning. That drawn sword, not in a scabbard, but drawn, that tells me that the iniquity of the Amorite had become full, and God was ready to take his judgment on them. Now, please, try and get that into your understanding when you read passages like this. And something else too, that it affects your understanding of the Old Testament, and indeed the land of Israel today. The land of Israel does not belong to Israel because they are better than any other people. It doesn't belong to them because they deserve it. It belongs to them purely on the basis that God has promised it to them. And he promised it to them because he was taking it away from the people who had defiled it, polluted it. The Bible speaks in the book of Leviticus particularly about sexual perversion. In Deuteronomy, it speaks about other things that pollute the land, like the occult, a lot of stuff that goes under the name of magic and so on. And he said these people are deeply, deeply into this. And they're so deeply into it that they've polluted this land. And God would take it no longer. And he came in judgment and removed all those people. He did it through Israel. They were the people that were to exact that execution. But it happened because of the righteousness of God. And when you and I read these passages and we struggle a bit, and we should struggle with it, and we have difficulty in squaring it with the God of love, can I just implore you to remember that God is a God of love, and he's also a God of justice. This is not a good illustration, but forgive me, it's the best I can think of this afternoon anyway. We use, I'm going to say bleach, but bleach comes under all sorts of trade names today. You know what I mean by bleach. We use that to clean out germs in places that we don't want germs around, kitchens and toilets and so on. Because if we don't, there's harmful bacteria that cause even bigger problems and bigger problems. So we get rid of those things. Sin is like that. Sin is a thing that if you left it undealt with, it's going to bring more problems. And God's judgment deals with sin. We ought to be thankful that God doesn't tolerate sin. Because if he did, we'd be in real trouble. And moreover, not only does God judge sin because it must be judged, God's provided a way of escape from his judgment of sin. So if men and women refuse to take it and say, no, we prefer our sin, thank you very much, they're going to get caught up in the judgment of that sin. Follows, doesn't it? Logical. So before we start talking about ethnic cleansing and gruesome genocide and barbaric acts and so on, please, will you take something of that thinking into your minds and bring that reverently and carefully to your reading of the Old Testament. I get very sad when I hear of people who have turned away from Christianity because they can't square what they read in the Old Testament with what they think they know about God. Please don't be like that. I want to say this last thing on this first point. What passages like this teach us is the seriousness, the deep, deep seriousness of sin. And that's just the first thing I want to bring to you. In Ezekiel, God said through his prophet, the soul that sins shall die. Simple. That's it. Because God has to deal with sin. And yet he's provided a way in which we might not die, but we might live, if only we would listen to him. Now, let's go to the second consideration. I want to say something about the method of conquest, God's method of conquest. In Jericho, it was strange. That's putting it mildly, isn't it? We say again, if you looked over the walls of Jericho and saw what these people were doing, you'd have thought, I have never in my life seen anything like this. When it comes to AI that we've read about in chapter 8, it's very different to chapter 6. And it's more the kind of thing that we recognize as military strategy. And some of the great military strategists of history, we can sort of bring into that Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, all these Napoleon Bonaparte, and other people that history applauds because they're military strategists. They work out where to place their army, how to divide them, when to attack, when to pull back. That's what Joshua was doing here. But notice it wasn't Joshua. It was the Lord. This was the Lord's plan. But the point I'm making to you, it was very different. We think about conquest. The Lord brings about conquest in different ways. And in Jericho, it was one kind of way that was very, very strange. And in Ai, it was another method that we kind of recognize. God does that, I suggest to you, so that we as human beings might not get too cocky and think, we won on that occasion because we did this and we did that. Listen to this. This is Paul in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7. We have this treasure in jars of clay. He says we're jars of clay. And the things that God does with us and for us are treasured things. But we have this in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. So the Israelites couldn't say, well, we whooped the Jericho city good and proper, and wasn't that a good idea of ours to walk around? It's God's idea. They must have questioned it themselves. And they couldn't say, well, Ai, of course, we got our act together then. It was God's idea. It was his plan. It was his commandment. And I should have said at the beginning, really, that what we're thinking about when we're talking about conquest is your Christian life and mine. Because we all have battles to fight. They're not battles with swords and spears and things, but they're battles against spiritual forces that are out to spoil our lives. And God has a plan for us to have the conquest. And don't think you and I can come up with clever ideas as to how to get all this sorted. We can't. But God knows how to do it. And if we'd only listen to him, do it his way, whether it seems strange or whether it seems something that's recognizable, just obey what he says, because the glory belongs to him, the surpassing power belongs to him, and not to us. Let's have a look at the next one. The victory that we read about in Ai in chapter 8 followed a defeat. Now, you only know that because I told you what happened in chapter 7, but you can check it for yourselves. The first time they went up to Ai, it was an unmitigated disaster. They saw them coming, the men of Ai, and thought, here's these Israelites, open the gates, let's go and at them. And they came running out of the gates and they attacked, and Israel turned around and ran away. I don't think they were expecting that to happen. And then the Lord told them why it had happened. It was because of this sin of Achan that had to be dealt with. Chapter 7 in Joshua, the book of Joshua, I'm going to admit this to you. I don't like reading it. It does a number on me. I do read it because this is the word of God, and we have a responsibility to read it through from start to finish, even the bits that make us feel really, really uncomfortable. And there's a reason for that. But I don't like reading it because it's a hard thing to read. When Joshua discovered that Achan was the cause of the defeat, because there was sin that hadn't been dealt with in the camp of Israel, he dealt with it. And a man and his family lost their lives. And you say, why the family? Well, I think the family must have been implicated in the sin. It's the only way I can understand it. They lost their lives. But through dealing with sin in that way, many people saved their lives. Sin has to be dealt with if we're going to know a conquest. It's the same with you and I. If you keep something hidden, not dealt with, we're going to suffer for it. That uncomfortable, discomforting chapter tells me that. Please remember it. When you feel that voice of conscience telling you that there's something between you and God, you're really not happy, to face up to certain things. Imagine thinking you have a secret from God. He sees everything. I don't know what Achan was thinking he was doing, hiding that garment and gold. I was going to say underneath the floorboards, but he was in a tent. I don't know if he did a hole, or I don't know what he did, but he hid it somehow. Did he think that God couldn't see it? And we laugh at that, but what about the things in our lives that we think, well, nobody else knows? My mum and dad don't know, my friends don't know, but God knows. He knows everything about me. There's never been a thought, David said this in one of his psalms, never a thought in my head, never a word from my mouth, never an action that I've done or not done, because the sins of omission as well as commission. There's never any of these things that haven't been known to God. He knows absolutely everything about me. Don't be fooled, because Satan wants you to be deceived by this, that it doesn't matter because nobody knows about it. God knows about it. And bring it in confession to him. Own up. If someone else is involved, then make sure that you confess to them too. And get that thing taken away, because that's how sin is dealt with. And only when the sin is dealt with will there be a conquest. Otherwise, they'd have gone up to Ai the second time and the same thing presumably would have happened. They'd have come out and chased them off again. That didn't happen because the thing had been dealt with. See the importance of it? So the men came out and they were caught this time in a great victory. Look at this. This is Isaiah 59, first 2 verses. Read this with me because it contains a very important thing for us tonight. Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save. It might have looked like that the first time they went up to Ai. Whoa, the Lord's not delivered the city. They've chased us away. He says that's not the case. Nor is the Lord's ear dull that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. That's why sin is so important, so serious. God's not going to treat you as if the thing didn't exist until it's confessed and forgiven. It's so important. There's no other way. And there's no other way with the great Jerichos, and there's no other way with the little Ais. So whether it's a big deal that you're facing in your life, or whether it's just an itty-bitty thing that you think is not so important, if it's wrong, and if it's a thing that needs to be conquered in your life, even the little things, you still need the power of God to conquer those things as well. Don't think that, well, it's just the biggest, and this one, I can handle this myself. I knew a man who was having trouble with alcohol, and I went to see him. He was a believer in Christ. He was a disciple of Jesus Christ. I sat down with him, said I knew about it, was wanting to lead him to confession to the Lord, and he did. And then the same thing happened several times, and I remember sitting with him one day saying, you need help. You need the kind of help that I can't give you. You need medical help and some more help to get away from this addiction to alcohol, because by that time it had taken a hold. And I always remember him saying to me, Phil, I can handle this. Maybe he thought it was an AI. It wasn't. It just got worse. Don't do it. Don't treat any problem that you have as potentially so small that you don't need God's help to deal with it. Because the AIs, the little AIs, need God's power as much as anything else. Oh, the next thing are the spoils, the plunder, the booty, whatever words you want to call it. When they went to war, there were things left over. And you remember at Jericho, they weren't to touch them. And that was Achan's sin. But at Ai, what did we read? The Lord said to Joshua, this time you can tell the people to take what's there. You can take it back. You know, I read that recently and I saw something I'd never seen before, and you'd probably think, well, you're really slow. I am. But I realized that if only Achan had thought that there's more cities, and if I need a really nice garment, or if I need some gold bars or medallions, whatever they are, then I really need them. God will supply them, and he'll supply them from the next city or the one after that, or whatever. So he's told me not to touch the Jericho ones. That's good. I won't touch them, because whatever my need is, he'll supply. Do you know, that's true. If he had only thought that way, he would have been on the right lines. Because God doesn't impoverish his people. Doesn't keep us away from the things that we really need. And he will supply those things. So why disobey his commandments in order to try to get hold of something that he in his own time will provide for you? This isn't about fancy garments or gold bars, by the way. This is about things like relationships. And maybe there's a whole lot of other things you can think of too. Sometimes you're tempted to take a shortcut into a part of a relationship, which he says, no, that's not for you. And he will provide. Whatever you need as his child, he will provide for you. Look at this. And David, you were saying this came up in your group this morning, but oh dear, what have I done? Well, yeah, this is it. No, it's not. It's this one. Hebrews 13:5. This little promise here, I know it crops up in different places, but isn't it wonderful? And the writer of the Hebrews says, keep your life free from the love of money. I think in some versions it says covetousness. That's really wanting to grab hold of something that isn't ours. Keep yourself free from the love of money. Be content with what you have. For he, that's God, for he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And he's quoting from the Old Testament. That's the God we have. He knows what we need, and he's promised to be with us. God doesn't impoverish us. He's generous and he's good in his provisions for us. But when we treat his generosity or his provision and his goodness as things to be taken for granted, and when we object to taking from what he's given to us and giving it back to him, we've got a problem. Perhaps that's something we need to recognize in our lives too from time to time. You know what David said, Israel's greatest king? He said, I don't have anything that you didn't give me. He said, what I'm giving to you is what you gave to me in the first place. And years later, the Apostle Paul wrote something like that to the Corinthians as well. We don't have anything that we didn't receive from God. So when we give it back to God, we're only giving to him what he gave to us. Would you show your generosity to God as a reflection of his generosity to you? Would you really withhold anything from the God who's given us the plunder of AI, the plunder of the conquests? Let me show you one more thing and then we're done here. This sounds a tricky point to finish on, but we're going to do it anyway. They kept the king alive and they brought him to Joshua. And Joshua impaled him on a pole or hung him on a tree, the old versions say. Let me tell you something about that. That wasn't execution. When Joshua had him hung up, he was already dead. They had no reason, and certainly no commandment from God, to hang people. This kind of thing, that's the public display of an executed person, is throughout history. Taking place in this land, not that long ago really. London, Scotland, Europe. They impaled the body or parts of the body of people who'd been executed. And I suppose the reason was to warn people not to do what they'd done. See what happened to him. Don't let it happen to you. So it was a gory head hanging off the castle wall or something. It's English history, Scottish history. It goes right the way back here. And if you follow it back to the book of Deuteronomy, God said to his people, if you've executed somebody, and because you carried out the death penalty, because their crime deserved the death penalty, if you've done that, and afterwards you decide to hang that corpse of the executed person up so that other person, they get the real message, then make sure that is there, then taken down at sunset. It's not to be left there overnight. To be taken down and dealt with. So there's no gory, endless display in what God allowed his people to do. And I take it that's what happened. Well, it is what happened today. Joshua hung up the body of an executed man to make it perfectly plain what happens to people who oppose God. What I want to finish on with you really, though, from this point, is something that the Apostle Paul picked up years later. And he wrote to brothers and sisters of yours and mine. If you're a Christian, you've got brothers and sisters who are written about in this book. Some of them were in the churches of God in Galatia province. And Paul wrote them a letter, wrote to the Galatians. And this is what he said. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, and here it is, here's the quote, "Cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree." I used to read that and think that people who are hanged by the neck or whatever on a tree, they're cursed, and that's the way they're put to no, not the way they're put to death. These are people who've already been executed according to a death penalty, but then they're hanged on a tree as a gruesome, powerful, potent message to everybody else. This is what happened. Don't do it. Don't go that way. Jesus Christ? Why? Why would they hang his body up? And for him, it was a matter of execution. It was crucifixion. But Paul looked back on that, and he linked it with this commandment in Deuteronomy. And here's a public display of Jesus Christ as somebody who was cursed. Now, in the Jewish law, which went back to the Mosaic law, it was people who had disobeyed the law of God. This is what happens to people who disobey the word of God. Put them up on public display, their bodies, let everybody see them. And they did that to Jesus Christ. He never broke a single law in his life. Never thought a wrong thing, never said a wrong word, never did a wrong deed. He couldn't be cursed by the law. Then why was he treated as if he had? You know the answer. The Lord Jesus became a curse for us, says. It was because he was bearing my guilt, not his. It was my guilt that was put upon him, and he bore it in his own body on the tree of Calvary, on the cross. The only man who never broke the law of God was giving himself for people like me who had broken the law of God. If that doesn't make you want to love Jesus more and give him your life again tonight, I don't know what will. I couldn't understand you. Please think about it. The last part of this chapter, which we didn't read, has to do with the covenant. And because of time, we're going to leave that. And that's okay, because I tell you what we'll do, with God's help. On Friday night, the last talk, we're going to be speaking about the covenant that was Joshua reminded them of at the end of his life. And we can talk about this one at the same time. But I will just say this to you, just in finishing, that conquest and covenant are very, very closely linked. That's why we put them up here. We have no ability to conquer the difficulties in life, the sin that so easily besets us, it says in Hebrews. We have no ability to conquer these things in our life unless it was for the covenant of God. And the covenant is a binding promise into which God bound himself in order that you and I could know what it is to conquer sin. Let's have our prayer.